Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Safwan Masri, Executive Vice President for Columbia Global Centers and Global Development. I am delighted to be broadcasting from the Amman Global Center, one of 9 global centers dispersed around the world that act as satellites, if you will, of Columbia University, engaging our faculty and students with partners, institutions, individuals, and the general public in these locations. I'm very, very pleased to welcome with me today for the special webinar a number of very distinguished guests whom I will introduce more fully in a couple of minutes. But just to welcome them, I'm delighted to have His Excellency Dr. Ziad Fariz, Governor of the Central Bank of Jordan, Noor Jarrar, CEO of Citibank Jordan. Welcome, Noor. Shahm Elwir, partner at the Fursan Group based in Amman. Ali Abu Kumail, acting resident representative for the World Bank mission in Jordan. Ahlan Ali. And as our moderator, one of our own, a Columbia graduate, Mary Nazal, a barrister and social entrepreneur and the founder of Landmark Hotels and the chairperson of 17 Ventures. This is the second event in a series that focuses on Jordan's economy in the context of COVID-19 and the global economic crisis that we are facing. The first webinar was held in June and it focused on industry. We had panelists from tourism, manufacturing, technology, and pharmaceutical sectors, as well as some rising entrepreneurs. This first panel, we discussed the disproportionate effect of the pandemic on different sectors in Jordan and explored potential crisis intervention strategies that are being pursued in country. This panel today convenes prominent government and financial sector leaders to help us learn about the financial measures that have been adopted to mitigate the crisis and how the banking sector in particular, which is a very powerful economic engine, can reorient the economy towards growth. Now, the world economic outlook, it's pretty grim, as we know. The International Monetary Fund has predicted a worldwide GDP contraction in 2020 of almost 5%. The impact on middle income and developing countries is huge. If we look at the region of the Middle East and North Africa, we see also some troubled signs. Of course, an outlier at some extent is Lebanon, which has been pushed to the breaking point. Economic collapse, the lira has lost more than 80% of its value since last October. Of course, this is due to corruption, mismanagement, and exacerbated, of course, by the COVID-19 crisis and the tragic explosion that took place last month. When you look at some of the GCC countries in this neighborhood, you find that many are insulated, but they certainly are not immune. Fitch downgraded Oman's credit rating for the second time this year, as just one example. In Kuwait, you have a 46 billion budget shortfall, and they may have to begin borrowing internationally to pay the public sector salaries of Kuwaiti employees. Other GCC countries are tapping into foreign currency reserves, potentially undermining pegs against the dollar. To take a look at Jordan, compared to the previous year, the first quarter government revenues have plunged by more than 600 million JDs, almost $1 billion. The IMF is forecasting a 3.4% reduction in Jordan's GDP. Remittances, which have historically been a major source of foreign currency reserves, have dropped by at least 10%. Unemployment rates could be approaching 30% by year's end. The tourism industry, which generated almost $6 billion in 2019, has been severely impacted by border closures and the COVID crisis. All this raises questions about a number of things, including His Excellency Ziad Fariz's favorite subject, and that is the stability of the Jordanian dinar, something he gets asked about all the time. The slowdown in capital inflows and the shifting liquidity of the private sector can potentially undermine confidence in the currency, of course. Experts have predicted some recovery in Jordan in the third quarter. A rise in locally transmitted cases may, on the other hand, slow economic growth. We've seen that rise over the past few weeks. A lot of political and economic capital has been spent during the lockdown period that started in March. And the choice of public health versus the economy has also been a very, very interesting one. And through the Columbia Global Centers, we held a webinar in July with leading public health experts and economists to tackle this question. Economist Glenn Hubbard and public health experts such as Linda Fried and Wafa Sadr and Mary Bassett joined us for a discussion as to whether the choice between economic and public health is in fact a false choice. And many of the points raised during that webinar insisted that it is indeed a false choice, that actually you need good public health to have a healthy economy and vice versa. So with all of this as background and to help us understand some of these issues and in particular the economic trajectory of Jordan, our panelists will address questions about financial inclusion, investor confidence, the private sector, small to medium enterprise support, as well as digital e-payments. So this will be a broad range of topics that we will try to address in trying to understand the economic outlook in Jordan. So just to introduce more fully our panelists, His Excellency Dr. Ziad Fariz, as I mentioned, is the governor of the Central Bank of Jordan. That's a position that he has held since 2012. He previously held that same role from 1996 to 2000, and he has held numerous high-profile public and private sector posts, including Chairman of Capital Bank, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the Jordanian government, CEO and General Manager of Arab Banking Corporation, and Chairman of the Export and Finance Bank. He's also served as Minister of Industry, Trade and Supply, and as the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation. Ziad, it really is a wonderful opportunity to have you here with us sharing your knowledge, expertise, and wisdom. And for me personally, it's also wonderful to have a close friend like you joining us today. Noor Jarrar is the CEO of Citibank Jordan. Previously, Noor was the head of the wholesale banking group at Bank ABC Jordan. Prior to joining Bank ABC, Noor had worked in the economic development division of the Royal Hashemite Court and in Jordan's Housing Bank for Trade and Finance. Noor is a member of the board of directors of the Association of Banks in Jordan and a board member in the American Chamber of Commerce in Jordan. Welcome, Noor. Shahm Elwer is a partner with Fursan Group, a Jordan-based private equity investment firm with a focus on the MENA region. Prior to joining Fursan, Shahm was with Debevoise and Plimpton in New York, a leading global law firm. Shahm is a member of the Economic Policies Council, chaired by His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan. Ahlan Shahm. Ali Abu Kumail is the acting resident representative with the World Bank Mission in Jordan. Previously, he has been a private sector development specialist with the World Bank in Washington, D.C. and in the Palestinian territories. Before joining the World Bank, Ali had worked as an advisor to Tony Blair in his capacity as representative of the Quartet on the Israel-Palestine peace process. He has also worked in several technical positions at Development Alternative Inc., with a focus on the development of the Palestinian furniture sector. Welcome, Ali. And last but certainly not least, I'm really delighted to have as our moderator today, Mary Nazal, chairperson of 17 Ventures and founder of Landmark Hotels. By way of introduction, 17 Ventures is an impact investment and advisory firm specialized in aligning businesses with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She launched the Jordan Growth and Impact Fund and is managing a global refugee investment fund. Mary was chosen as Jordan's top businesswoman in 2019 and as one of Forbes' most powerful Arab women for several years. She is also a young global leader with the World Economic Forum, a qualified barrister of the Bar of England and Wales, and she completed a BA in Political Science from Columbia University, magna cum laude. Mary, welcome, and I think I can get away with saying that I am incredibly proud of you. So Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you as you moderate our panel of discussants. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be part of such an important session. I'd like to welcome all the panelists and the audience members today. In June, as was just mentioned, the Columbia Center hosted an exceptional panel on the future of business. And at that time, we couldn't really predict what would be the state of affairs today. We now know Jordan, like the rest of the world, has experienced a severe and unprecedented structural economic shock on both the supply and demand side of the economy. At the macro level, Jordan is presented with some risks to the national budget. At the micro level, businesses are facing serious challenges due to declining revenues, risk of insolvencies, and job losses. According to a survey conducted in April 2020 by the Jordan Strategy Forum, 75% of businesses said they were severely impacted by the crisis. 67% said their revenues were plummeted by more than 75%, and 53% said their revenue over the next 3 months would not cover operating costs. Indeed, today we will hear more up-to-date figures from a World Bank Enterprise Survey, which gives unique insight into the state of the private sector today. But as I am the moderator of this panel, it will not be all doom and gloom. Of course, we will start by taking stock of where we are. But as the title of today suggests, we will also focus on mitigating the repercussions of the pandemic. And we will also attempt to look forward with cautious optimism and consider how we may build back better. Before we jump into the discussion, I'd like to remind the audience to ask their questions using the question tool, and I will direct them to the panelists. Please do not hesitate to ask. Every contribution is important. In these trying times, we need collective and diverse thinking. So with that, I'd like to turn to His Excellency, Dr. Ziad Fariz. Your Excellency, can I please ask as a first step for you just to explain to us what has been the overall impact on the economy so far? We will dive into the measures that the central bank has taken, but for now, if you can give us your unique insight on the economic impact for us to understand the overall macroeconomic situation.
Thank you very much. And I would like to also thank Safwan for his excellent introduction, where he identified and clarified the global picture, as well as the implication on the region and on Jordan as well, and how gloomy the situation is given the very difficult situation of this coronavirus and its behavior in the worldwide, including the region. And this behavior has been reflected on the economy. Actually, Corona came while we were about to move in growth after a very slow period of growth. We were hoping that growth will resume by 2020 and continue to increase. Then this drama came, this shock, which got everybody by surprise. The impact was huge, and as Safwan said, assessing the overall impact on the macro level still subject to so many assessments in the light of what's happening in response to the pandemic. So, but having said that, as it happened in the expectation of world economy, we keep changing the impact. Every time in the beginning, they were expecting 2% decline on growth world economy. Then we're talking about 4.6%. Whether IMF, World Bank, various forum, G20, everybody, the assessment is always moving in a negative direction. I would say the same thing for us in Jordan. The impact, as we see it, on the growth, that while we were expecting a growth of more than 2% to 2020 this year, now expectation that growth will be negative by 4.6%. This has been affected by, of course, coming back to the global and to the region, balance of payment, the closure of the border, that we have been closing for 3 months almost. So exports has been affected, remittances has been affected, tourism has been affected, and of course imports also has been affected. And overall demand was affected. I will remind you also one challenge we faced in the very beginning, that people were really shocked and they want cash. We were subject that many people wanted their cash in their home or in their pocket. So there was some sort of withdrawal of deposits from the market. So we were under a great challenge in the central bank to achieve one objective, to create confidence that the system will be able to meet this new challenge. Remittances has two aspects, not only the expected decline in remittances, but also expected return of workers of Jordanian. Tourism also, we were expecting, while the first quarter was doing very well, expected loss goes up to 75% of the revenue of tourism. What happened in the region in the form of depression as a result of declining oil prices has also the oil bill for Jordan has declined, correct, and compensated for a large loss of revenues from tourism and from remittances and exports. But the question of demand impact in the region and the decline in export has also affected us. So overall, our balance of payments and the current account deficit as a percentage of GDP, while we were expecting that the deficit will be only 2% in 2020, now expectation that the deficit will be about 6.8% of GDP. And it could have been much worse had it not been to the trade deficit that has declined because of the decline in oil, not in import, not only because of oil, but also because of other consumer items that has affected the decline in import. But this is on the macro side. So growth, balance of payment, of course, budgets. Safwan talked about the impact of the budget. There's a decline for sure on the revenue side, while the burden on the government to meet the challenge is on the increase. This is another big challenge for the government. The on the monetary side, we deposits has slowed down in growth, actually declined in the very beginning. Now we are resuming as we regain confidence in the market. People are returning their deposits back, and but credit continue to grow. We were concerned about the impact of the financial system. This is why we have taken some measures to help out in this. But the overall impact, of course, has been negative on growth. Another important element I haven't mentioned, I forgot to talk about, which is unemployment, which is a main worry now, not only for government, but also for central banks. As you may have heard, new monetary policies coming out worldwide, and new role for the central bank and monetary policy in dealing with unemployment. So the recent figures released yesterday that until the second quarter, unemployment reached 23%, up from 19%, which is a big jump. But I think the figure or the percentage still premature to judge until we see how the market is going to move in the future. We expect recovery to be in 2021 by 4%. This is based on the assumption that the impact will start to diminish by fourth quarter of this year. So this is so far the assumption that we can see on the future. But the central bank and the banking system during the period has been involved in dealing with the short-term implication of the economic and financial impact on the overall economy and on the people themselves to help augmenting consumer demand, let me say.
Your Excellency, we would like to dig deeper on the measures that the bank has taken, and we'd like to speak further about unemployment and job creation. But just to stay on the macro economic side for the moment, Professor, can I just invite you to complete the picture, to ask your question about the perception of debt and debt levels in Jordan at the moment?
Yeah, so thank you, Mary, and thank you, Ziad. This really paints a wonderful context and frames the issues for us, and I look forward to hearing also from our other panelists. But, you know, I hear a lot, and as you know, Ziad, I'm usually based in New York, and I have been fortunately stranded in Amman since mid-March, and I say
We're fortunate
yes,
to have you.
really. I happened to be in Amman in mid-March, and it took me about 3 seconds to decide to stay here as opposed to try to get out and go back to New York. So in a way, I parachute in and out, and I pick up on certain things. And one of the things I picked up on quite a bit during this period, in talking with many distinguished business people and some government officials, there's a lot of talk about the high debt level in Jordan. And, you know, there is also, of course, concern throughout the developing world, I should say, about rising debts. You know, we worry, for example, I look at Chile, a country like Chile or any number of countries around the world, but Chile in particular, because I have a center in Santiago and I was there just in December. And one wonders when people are able to take to the streets again, you know, what the temperature is going to be like, given that many of the countries in the global south have actually accumulated more debt as a result of the corona crisis that we're in. Have there been any structural shifts in countries like Jordan, and this doesn't have to be only about Jordan, to take into account this increasing debt level that is taking place in the developing world? Thank you.
Well, this is a very interesting question. Definitely, debt and debt sustainability, I may use, is a big question for us, and has been the issue for policymakers, Minister of Finance, the government, the program with the IMF, how to reduce the debt level to a level that is sustainable. And in order to do that, there is a program, at least not to have the debt on the increase despite the coronavirus and its application. And this requires a structural reform, which the government is adopting. Now, obviously, there is a need to enhance domestic revenue. There is a need to rationalize government expenditure. There is a need to target subsidies and reduce the need for more borrowing to reach economic objectives. And of course, above all, we need growth. So there is a dilemma now. In order to reduce the ratio of debt as a percentage of your economy, of your GDP, in whatever form you calculate it, you need to have a very high rate of growth, which we were trying to do with the program that we're adopting in the government and the central bank, monetary policy, fiscal policy, and so on. So this definitely the crisis that we are facing in meeting with the challenge of corona is making life difficult, not in the sense that we were not able to stop increasing the debts. But what we were trying to do now is to continue in our structural program to deal with the energy question and do the right reform, because one of the main reasons for Jordan borrowing is the question of energy. And you know, energy has cost us in the last 7-8 years more than 5 billion increase in borrowing, which was a burden which we could have avoided had it been there was some sort of reform in the energy sector, which we are trying to do now in a gradual way, without really impacting the growth and the economic sector and the consumer as well, given the structure of the Jordanian economy and the social constraints that we have. So I think reform is needed, is on the way also in the water sector. There is a program now with the World Bank and the IMF to do all the necessary measures to reduce the need for more debt and reduce making self-sustained growth in the proper sense of the word. Another thing which is going on now, and which I think is a right step, is to reduce or to fight what I call tax evasion, which is very, very important element. Tax evasion is a phenomena that is all over the world, but in Jordan, it's costing us large amounts of foregone revenues for the government. A structural reform is being made now in the tax department, as I know, to do some financial analysis and on scientific basis to deal with the tax avoidance and tax evasion as well. And of course, legal and law, tax law is always under review. So it is a continuous process. But well, you are right. The debt burden is a burden. We need to reduce the debt as much as we can, but also we need to continue, particularly now, to stimulate demand, because one of the problems that is creating low growth, not only in Jordan, but all over the world and in the region, is the decline in the overall demand, as you know. This is
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, on that. Professor, if I can just move on, please, to Ali, and we're lucky to have him from the World Bank. Ali, you and I have discussed that the World Bank recently conducted a survey of more than 550 enterprises of different sizes. I wonder if you can take us through the results of that survey, pointing to what challenge you believe is the most concerning with regard to economic recovery.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for having me today. The challenges are big, and as all the panelists have spoken earlier, the problem is that this is a compounded shock that has both the demand and supply side in them, and that was felt by everyone around the world. And it's not evenly felt across sectors, and this is what we've seen in the assessment. So I would say if we look at the production as a first area that we can look at, 5.1% of the firms were permanently closed since the COVID pandemic was declared. And unfortunately, the big percentage of those were actually the large firms who are like 100-person worker or more. And these are the more contributors to the private sector and growth. And in that sense, we're losing part of our growth engine because of what's happening right now. On adaptability and also under the production, we were hoping that a big number, and that's a forward-looking approach, would adapt more to the situation and change their production line and services. But only 2.5% of the firms over there have actually made some changes to their production lines or services, which means they still work with modes that are not really very relevant today, and they're not coping with the situation, which is an area of intervention that we should think about. The good news in that is that 20% of the female-owned businesses have actually made those changes in their production lines and services. And this is smart, and that's not strange. In terms of capacity utilization, I would say that the overall average across all sectors is around 49.5 or 50%. This is around 10% lower than the situation pre-COVID, which is not dramatic, but it could lead to some layoffs. As His Excellency Dr. Ziad mentioned, there was a number that was issued a couple of days ago, around 23% of unemployment. And I would say this is actually a number that may increase and may decrease. So, I mean,
really, just to step in, and this, I'm not going on script here at all, but I mean, considering Defense Order number 6, I mean, how can we have any realistic assumptions on what the unemployment rate could be? Perhaps you could speak to that.
So exactly, that's the point. I mean, as long as you have the Defense Order number 6, and when I went to a question that I put in the survey of how many did you lay off in the recent 3-4 months, and the number was 0, of course. And therefore, these numbers around unemployment are not yet realistic. So in the meantime, unless you pick up the growth, which is unlikely to be the case, then we're expecting to see unemployment coming our way. Not only unemployment, I mean, the figures so far on poverty is saying that there's an increase of about 10% in poverty in Jordan. And that happened only in the last few months, going from around 15 to 26%. So this is doesn't look good, and we need to talk about how to make it happen. Talking about the sales in general, I mean, 89% of the businesses have definitely had a decrease in sales. Only 7.3% had no change in sales, and there were winners who were around 3.3% that increased their sales during the COVID time. In terms of technology, which is a good aspect of the story, like 57% of the companies have increased their online activities, and they have adopted, 1/3 of them increased remote work. In terms of financing, which is a very important part to this panel, 92% of the firms say that they still need liquidity. And not strangely, almost 100% of the small businesses, because we had stratification of small, medium, large, the small businesses said that this is more important, and maybe that's then indicating that the MSME credit line didn't approach or target this small segment, and there should be a way to look into that. So far, most of the companies that have borrowed have depended on lending. So 21% of them have used loans. Only 3.5% had equity, and NBFIs, or non-banking financial institution, is almost non-existent, with less than 0.5%. In terms of policy response, 33%, like 1/3 of them, said that they have received some government assistance. And 20% they said that we had access to new credit that we hadn't have before. And not strangely again, the biggest percentage of those are the medium businesses, which means that this is the target group of the MSME credit line, and they have reached their target properly. Last but not least, in terms of expectations, 40% of the businesses say that they're likely to fall in arrears on their outstanding liabilities, and they expect at least 10 months to recover and go back to normal situation, hence or when the COVID implications stop. So I'll stop there. Happy to share more views about the bigger picture and how to move on from here, but I'll come at a later stage. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thank you. And we will be discussing liquidity issues and credit issues with Noor in a bit. But just turning to Shaham, and thank you for joining us on this panel. Shaham, you know, as a partner in Fursan, a private equity firm, you have sort of a broad view into different sectors. I wonder if you could take us, you know, sector by sector through the sectors that you're involved with and explain to us what have been the effects of COVID-19 and whether you see any potential opportunities in particular sectors after we emerge from this crisis.
Thanks for having me on the panel. Through investing across a variety of sectors, we get to see a variety of companies and that operate in a variety of sectors and various stages of development. There are some winners, there are some losers. I think it's important to note that many of these companies were having a difficult time in 2018 and 2019 before COVID hit. And so there are some issues that we need to deal with there. So I was saying that I think hospitals year to date, we saw revenues down by about 30%. And during the lockdown for some of these hospitals, especially the specialty hospitals, they saw their revenues down anywhere between 80 to 100%. Hospitality year to date is down, depending on the sector, whether it's restaurants or confectionaries, anywhere between 30 to 60%. And for some of them, if you look at some of the leading groups in those sectors, they've run analyses where they've said, look, with defense orders and some of the government policies in place right now, it is actually cheaper for us to shut down than to continue to operate. Now they have a responsibility, an ethical one towards their employees. They don't want to, they have a long history, so a lot of groups aren't doing that right now. But if we were just to calculate it purely mathematically and look at the economics, for some, this is proving to be distressing. Schools, which I think is interesting because almost everyone on this call has either a son or a nephew or the like.
Okay, Shaham's internet connection seems to be giving us some trouble. So I'm just going to hop over to you, Noor. You know, we've taken stock of where we are on the macro level. We've had a little bit of insight on the sectoral level. Hopefully we'll be able to come back to Shaham with more on that. But since you are a leader in a global bank, I wonder if you can give us some insight into sort of global trends. How are people reacting? Any opportunities generally, but also in the financial and banking sector? Shaham, we'll come back to you. Sorry, your internet, I think, just cut at that moment.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. It brings me great pleasure to be amongst this distinguished group of speakers. This is a very important question, Mary, and I think as Dr. Ziad just mentioned, it just touches basically every economy. And I want to start with sharing a few ideas, and they are open for debate. So feel free to challenge me, or in the Q&A, please feel free to ask questions. So the first idea that I want to share is related to supply chain. And many of you would agree with me that globalization took a beating during the COVID-19 pandemic and exposed the vulnerability in the global supply chain and putting it into the spotlight. So corporates found their supply chains were more fragile either because input that they were importing or sourcing from foreign countries became unavailable, or because manufacturing or partial manufacturing or even services that at one point in time was moved offshore became subject to lockdowns. So making really a difference between what is operational and what is not operational. And that triggered policymakers to rethink essential supply chains and the need to have those either moved domestically or regionally in order to meet for emergency needs and in order for national security. And this represents an opportunity for Jordan and for the private sector in Jordan in terms of tapping into regional markets where there is larger demand, and that is by closely integrating into those regional markets. And over the past couple of months, we have seen a number of excellent examples and success stories in the Jordanian private sector who have really made a difference in the region. So this is one of the ideas. The other idea that I have is related to public wealth of nations or public wealth funds. And this is not a sovereign fund discussion, just to make a distinction between the two. According to the IMF, the public wealth globally accounts for 2% of the global GDP. And if this is professionally managed, this can earn an additional 3% in revenues per annum that can be reinvested into economies and can be used to restore economies. So what does that mean for Jordan? What does that mean for any country, as a matter of fact? First, it requires monetization of assets, understanding what is there in terms of real estate and in terms of operating assets, and building a comprehensive balance sheet that does not only include liabilities, but includes assets. The other item that follows is adopting accrual accounting as opposed to cash accounting. And this will automatically lead to a shift in mindset in terms of looking into infrastructure expenditures between healthcare to education as an investment rather than merely as an expense. And one very good example is New Zealand, whereby they have been adopting such accounting standards since their reforms in 1980s, and they are one of the few countries around the world that have been maintaining and achieving significant positive net worth ever since. So this is a live example. Enhancing management by knowing what kind of assets are available, public assets are available, then this can start to generate additional revenues for the country and for the economy. And this can be done by, the management of it is by integrating and managing those assets under a holding company structure, or what is called a public wealth fund. And if it is on a national level, then it is a national wealth fund. What is very important to highlight here is that ownership will be returned by the public, by the government. It will not move the ownership, and hence going out of the discussion and the controversial discussion regarding privatization and nationalization. A very good example, and one that many of you can relate to or know of, is in Singapore, where they have the 275 billion US dollar public national wealth fund that has been earning an average of 12% since inception. And this is a very good example that helped Singapore since 1974 to rebuild the economy, to reinvest into the economy and get to the place that they are in today. I was looking at the questions while the other speakers were sharing their valuable contributions. And I noticed that there were discussions about debt, about digitization. But before moving to the digitization part, which is very close to the heart of any banker in Jordan, I would say that on the issue of debt, having a national wealth fund or a public wealth fund will also help in relooking the debt, and in terms of having the assets regenerating revenues that can be reinvested into the economy, and tackling to a great extent the issue of debt. And also it is expected that by having public wealth fund and having the management of public assets followed by a management of debt would lead to an improvement in the overall rating of the country, and hence all the positive implications that comes with this in terms of our cost of credit and the related aspects. Moving to digital.
Sorry.
Do you mind just if we wait on the digital mechanism side, just because we're going to go into that, Professor?
You know, before you turn to Shaham, I just wanted to say, Noor, thank you for this, because to me, this is one of the most sort of out of the box thinking and sort of, paradigm shifting ideas I have heard in a long time. And not that it has not been out there and has not been transparent, but sort of, to focus on it and to think about that, and to think about sort of to think about Jordan in the context of this huge puzzle of what happens when you invest when you use the money generated from that public wealth to create investment climates around the world. So I wanted to thank you for that, and to also thank you for bringing in New Zealand into it, because I think what they have done in New Zealand under Jacinda Ardern during the COVID crisis, to also think of the economy through a different prism, and to really not look at the question that I raised in my introduction of the choice between economic health and public health, but rather look at how can the economy benefit from better health systems and vice versa. So I just wanted to add that note of appreciation, Noor.
Thank you so much. It's very, very much appreciated. So Mary, can I continue with my ideas? On,
do you mind if I just come back to you? Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to take the first mover's advantage on digitization, let's put it this way. So the third idea is basically on digitization. And again, important achievements have been realized to date. And the most evident for most of us, we've seen them in the banking sector. And I have to say that under the leadership of Central Bank of Jordan, much have been achieved, and there is still a number of projects in the pipeline which I believe will touch the lives of people, of Jordanian people, in a very, very interesting way. And also during the pandemic, what we all have seen in terms of e-learning, e-permits, whether we like them or we did not like them, but really they show that we have created momentum, and we can build on that momentum in a very good way. So what do we need? We need a national interlinked digitization strategy and agenda that touches on everything from end to end, because it is an interlinked process. It cannot be dissected. It cannot be put into pieces. So it doesn't start with the banking sector and end there. It needs to continue with each and every aspect in our lives in order to create more inclusion, in order to create and improve on the relationship between citizens and government, in order to work on transparency. His Excellency Dr. Fariz mentioned tax collection, and I really think by having digitization, that then this is an automatic improvement in tax collection. Efficiency and savings, and what we can realize from digitization, and in terms of the time, the effort, the resources that we spend on digitizations. And these are really extremely important things that, if factored into the economy, can be reinvested into the country. Where should we focus? We should focus on smart cities. We need to focus on healthcare, transportation, education, continue the digital payments journey and the importance of it, digital identity, social welfare, cybersecurity, and all of those items that are important for the country. And what we need for that, we need a sponsor. We need desire to run with those projects. We need to have the digital. We need to have a digital infrastructure which is already there, but build on it and make it even way better. We always talk about the public-private partnership, and this is where it can kick in a very interesting way, where the public-private sector can complement one another. So those are the comments that I had on digitization, and what can make it even more interesting if we combined development with digitization and have something what is called tech for development, then we can use the funds that are available in order to make an amplified impact in the economy. I'll stop here because I know that you wanted to cover this topic with the other speakers.
I did, and we only have 35 minutes left, and we haven't even gone halfway through.
May Mary just comment on the excellent ideas presented by colleagues? Number one, on the national fund. I think this is a story which require, in our case, a very big, very serious discussion. The issue of awqaf, monetization of awqaf money and zakah money and all other sources, whether awqaf Christian or Muslim awqaf. It's a national issue, and together with other sources of wealth in the country is very important. And I assure you, Noor, this has been under the discussion to create such a law to organize this, because this requires a legal infrastructure that ensure its existence and its legal status and protect the money. As it's the case in probably Singapore, as you said. The other issue about digitization. Digitization has been a number one pillar in our financial inclusion strategy. The idea was to increase the financial inclusion of the people in Jordan from 25% to 50%, and to make dealing with the financial sector in terms of through digitization is an issue. Now it is being developed to become to touch all sorts of life in Jordan, and we are in the central bank, and Noor knows that very well, working very hard with the government to create this national digitization strategy that will use the success we have so far in e-banking, in what you call it, wallets, money wallets, and in quick payments, during the crisis, we were successful in making transfer of money from national support fund to all beneficiaries. And this was a great success, and it was done by Jordanian. And there is an opportunity, great opportunity here, not to use digitization only for providing services and paying and paying money and receiving money, but also to develop the industry itself to become one of our major sources of wealth. and income and exports. And the Jordanian payment system now is being considered in other countries to be adopted. So I'm in many ways hopeful that this industry will prosper in the future, and we really benefited a lot. And we hear so many success stories during the crisis where Jordanian managed to create Amman, create so many services that has been useful and successful. So I just wanted to second the idea of the strategy of digitization, and I think the question of National Wealth Fund is still on the table to be considered seriously by the government, and I would say the decision-making process in Jordan, which is subject to a big discussion, I am sure.
Thank you, Dr. We do have a question on the National Wealth Fund from Shada Sharif asking how close is Jordan to establishing such a fund? What kind of scale is envisioned? Perhaps Noor, you want to come in on that. But just to stay on the topic of, going digital and using digital tools, I know Ali and I, we've discussed, the surge of e-wallets, during the pandemic. And there's a question about how can we sustain e-payments and the surge of mobile wallet users post-lockdown. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, similar to, So similar to global patterns, the government of Jordan has taken a decision under the leadership of the CBJ to lower the requirements of the Know Your Clients or KYC. And based on that, there was a surge in the number of e-wallets, as most of us know, from 360,000 to more than 1 million e-wallets that are active today. And we've seen also a number of new PSPs coming into the play. So it was an excellent decision by the CBJ. And I think the point now is to move forward in ensuring that you have bigger merchant on board, because the number of merchants that are using the e-wallets are still not that high. And therefore, what you need is more awareness, more incentives to get them on board. And it doesn't make sense in the sense of flowing money that you take the money and your e-wallet and then you go cash it out. You need to spend it in another resources so that you can complete the cycle. So in that sense, I mean, the CBJ and the Ministry of Digital Economy are working on that now. And they have a project that is underway that is going to finance this, as well as other activities to support digital economy in general. So there is a new project that is going to help on both demand and supply of the digital economy, also addressing points that Noor was talking about in terms of boosting demand in the private sector and equipping the youth for new skills and tapping into the different opportunities that are coming around the world using digital platforms and others. It will also look into areas related to government services and making sure that those are well connected, and data sets and open government, ensuring that there are the right APIs to connect data sets. So it's a comprehensive project that was just launched in April. We didn't do a lot of, or the ministry didn't do much of publicity yet about it because it came at the in the middle of COVID, but a lot is going to come in the next few weeks in terms of announcements.
Thank you so much. I know the ministry is doing some incredible work with your support. Shaham, to come to you, hopefully your internet line is more established now. Just if you'd like to finish your point that I cut you off on before, but also just moving forward, since our time is limited. We've spoken a lot about monetary policies. I wonder if you could talk about fiscal measures that we could be thinking about in terms of mitigating the repercussions of the pandemic.
Sure, thank you. And I got a lot of colorful messages. اللي قال لي اشتري حزمة جديدة، اللي قال لي جيب 4G، اللي قال لي الراوتر خربان تبعك، اللي قال لي رجع النوكيا وجيب لك تليفون. I'm really hopeful إنه الأصدقاء with digitization. I'm thinking Citibank will sponsor me for something. But thank you very much for all.
And I'm going to tell you, Shaham, you need a better microphone, or as Abu Muhammad said earlier, just get closer to the microphone if you could.
بقربه يعني I need to digitize myself كلياتني obviously.
لا.
I need to upgrade. أنا لساتني circa 1993.
خليك زي ما انت يا شهم.
We love you the way you are, Shah.
Just very quickly to finish, I wanted to touch quickly on schools because a lot of people were talking about schools. Schools today in the mid-tier to upper mid-tiers, in the mid-tier and the upper mid-tier, you know, about 1,500 JDs per student to about 3,000 JDs per student. We're seeing the number of students down by about 20 to 25%. And that's putting schools right at that break-even point. So for many of these schools today, they're right at that break-even level, and their receivables are very high. So you can imagine that there's a lot of pressure facing those schools. We talked about digitization. Clearly, companies in the call center realm, computer gaming are doing extremely well, especially during the lockdown. A lot of people were sitting down. We outsource a lot of that business during the lockdown. You know, if you want to buy your groceries, call centers were very busy. If you're into the gaming, people were spending a lot of time home, so they spent a lot of time on gaming, and their revenues increased exponentially. In the food sector, and this is something that His Majesty has spoken about, we've seen some of the food companies do really well in that realm, and their revenues are up nicely. Pharma is also doing well. And if we look at the Amman Stock Exchange, which just gives you an overall view of the market, you'll see that overall the stock exchange was down about 93% in terms of profits. Industry was down about 57%, and even banks, which are often vilified, and we keep talking that we should tax them and overtax them, those revenues were down by about, their profits were down about 63%. So that's just generally about sectors. And we're seeing, unfortunately, a bit more losers than winners right now, but there are definitely areas. In terms of fiscal stimulus, and I know some folks even may have sent those questions, I think the more we can spend, especially if we're borrowing on CapEx and capital expenditure versus on non-CapEx matters, I think that will create the growth that we're looking for. I know that the minister was trying to push for a higher CapEx budget. I think that's been lowered. In reality, 2020 is likely to be lower than 2019, but we're hoping that 2021 and going forward will be higher. There have been some measures by the government on fiscal stimulus, whether it's delaying taxes, whether delaying custom payments. I think the Social Security contributions, lowering those was very useful. These are creeping back up. I think if there's, me personally, I would like to keep them lower for a longer period. You're providing relief both to companies and to employees. So I think that's very interesting. Some people are looking at what's happening in neighboring countries. What's happening in Lebanon is a tragedy, but are we able to attract people from there, whether through businesses, big families, naturalization? Those policies are interesting because some of our naturalization schemes are maybe too expensive relative to other neighboring countries. So we need to think in a comparative manner. There's, again, in terms of fiscal stimulus, you know, the central bank and the monetary part will say, you know, you don't want to be too liberal because we don't want to see our debts rise too much. So there's a very fine balance here. One suggestion that's been out there for a while by a number of people is to use a TARP-like relief system. So you use essentially government assets and you provide debt in terms of a convertible note, perhaps, to companies. A very simple structure where you say, this is the product for a couple of years, and if you can't repay it, the government becomes an owner in your company, and it's a simple system where there are clear metrics. That's been used abroad, and I think that's something that some folks are thinking about. And I think, importantly, you know, the key issues that we're always tackling are unemployment and poverty. You know, there was a World Bank report saying that extreme poverty rates are likely to increase by 27% this year. That's people living on 1 JD and 1.3 JDs a day. So that's important to combat. And I think the National Aid Fund, Sunduq al-Ma'una, has done a good job. They've reached almost 15% of Jordanians, but we need to make sure that we're discussing both unemployment and poverty levels when we're thinking about balancing both fiscal and monetary. And again, on the monetary side, some of the relief that has come to companies has enabled them to remain in business and to operate. We need to do the same, putting cash in people's hands, even if there has to be, it's a tough balancing act. Brazil, if we're looking at just other countries, Brazil has been putting a lot of cash in people's hands lately. And despite the corona pandemic and the very high death rates there, actually people are feeling poverty rates have actually declined. And people, especially the poor, are feeling that their lives have improved a lot. I'm aware of the time constraints, so I'll leave it at that. And if there are questions later, I'm happy. And I'm still waiting for my routers and newest iPhones from panelists and friends alike.
Thank you. No, I'd like to just stick with this point of addressing the needs of the most marginalized. We have some questions from Nikki from Oxfam and Lana Stad from the Durable Solutions platform. And this was one of my questions anyway, Noor. You know, you and I both believe in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are all about leaving no one behind. When we're paving the path to economic recovery, what measures can we put in place to ensure that the most marginalized and the people who are really suffering the most as a result of this pandemic are not left behind?
Thank you, Mary. And indeed, this is a topic that is close to our heart, being the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically SDG number 5, which talks about gender equality. And let me share with you some interesting research that we have done in City that shows that 44 million people around the world are expected to lose their jobs, of which 31 million are women. That means more than 70% will be women. Now, I know that Ali mentioned certain things related to Jordan, whereby we might be doing better in terms of women who are already running their businesses. But the one thing that we need to take into consideration by looking into those global numbers, and just also to highlight that those numbers exclude China. If China was included, probably we would have totally different numbers. That we need to take women into policy making decisions and make sure that they are not excluded out of those decisions that are made within the country. The World Bank, and I'm quoting the World Bank and a study that was issued during COVID-19, but the statistics were before the crisis, before the health crisis, indicated that a 5% increase of women participation in the workforce per year for 5 years, and if maintained for another 10 years, so that's a total of 15, will lead to an increase of 2.5% in GDP per annum. And I can see His Excellency Dr. Ziad smiling on this.
Approving.
So I really think that it is important for us to really pay attention to this segment. And some people would say 2035, that seems like, that's so far away. But the question that we need to ask ourselves today, what if we did and took this action 15 years ago? Wouldn't we be in a better position today? So really what my call to action is really to take women into consideration and make sure that they are given the opportunity to be active participants in the economy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mary, if I may just interject on that point, I couldn't agree with you more, Noor. Had we started this 15 years ago, I mean, the World Economic Forum just published a report that predicts that we are a century away from achieving gender parity, okay? And I try to avoid equality because I think women are superior to men. And when you look at what has been happening in the world during the COVID crisis, and you look at the countries that have been able to navigate both the economy and the public health aspects of it, they have tended to be countries that are led by women. Women are able to connect with both sides of the brain, I think, in a way that is more superior to what the average man can, but that's another subject, another webinar. I just wanted to underscore how important it is that we get started on this. And two, that this is not for the sake of sort of, it's not charity, okay? Women are vital to the economic engine, and giving women the opportunities that they deserve actually produces results that everybody benefits from. So it's not a matter of rights only, but it is a matter of economic rights for all, that you have full participation by everyone. So anyway, there you have it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, the fact that Jordan ranks so low when it comes to female participation in the workforce is criminal. I mean, the Jordan Fund that we've now launched under 17 Ventures has the intentional focus to support companies that have a gender lens. Shaham, did you want to say something about gender? And then I'm going to jump to Ali.
I think what you just mentioned, you know, the fact that the female participation rate is at 14% in Jordan, the fourth lowest in the world. Even if we disagree with the methodology, to be so low and 58% of graduates of public universities are women, that's exactly as you mentioned, Mayor. I think that's criminal. And this is an economic panel. When we talk about even relief and kind of the fiscal stimulus, when you talk about putting cash in people's hands and support, often that only goes to the formal economy. It doesn't include the informal economy. So for example, most of the women and the marginalized are operating in that informal economy. So their issues get exacerbated more. And so that's why, as Noor mentioned, the Corona crisis is really disproportionately affecting women and other marginalized groups. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. So I'd like to just keep going down the path of, you know, looking forward, and in particular focus on the issue of impending unemployment rates, but also what skills do we need, you know, as a population, in particular, you know, thinking about youth and our young population. Ali, if you can speak to that and give us generally your view on the way forward, it'd be great.
Well, let's look at what is the structural issue here. I mean, as Dr. Fariz mentioned in the beginning, I mean, the growth engine wasn't working properly. So with whatever we're talking about, we need to bring growth to its good numbers that we had 7 or 8 or 10 years ago. And I hope that's possible. So we're now going to a new low base, which is actually way below what we had a year ago. And even 2% back then wasn't good enough to address the key issues in Jordan. So we needed back then to kickstart things, and it's now worse. So the structural issue is that the private sector is not generating jobs, and the jobs that have been generating were in the zone of 40, 50,000 net. These were not enough. The quality was not enough and was not really matching what is there in the market. And even if you look at the structural issue around exports, in a recent analysis that I was discussing with the government about, only across all sectors, we have 369 conventional exporters, if I may call them as such. They export a very few number of products, and no one new HS code has been added to the basket of exports for the last 2-3 years. So we have an issue in diversification, we have an issue in skills development, we have an issue in building the growth in the sectors that have a better chance to serve Jordan. And that will stay there unless we start moving in that direction and deploy all the beautiful ideas that these panelists have provided here to go in the right direction to support that. Jordan is a small country, so I don't think we need to go a lot horizontal when it comes to supporting unemployment and job creation. And we need to be very specific on, like, where is the demand going to come from? How can we boost it? And how can we support the supply on the other side, and then do the connection? And now we can leverage technology for that purpose. So let's start with what we have in our hand. I mean, let's see what demand we have now. Some colleagues talked about emerging sectors. I fully agree with those. And some colleagues talked about regional value chains. I fully agree with those. So these are opportunities. Let's look at them. How can we connect these big companies that are exporting to the smaller SMEs in the country? And that's within ecosystem. So who's doing that? I mean, it's not happening. I mean, it's happening at low scale because it's not really institutionalized. The second thing is that government procurement. I mean, the government has done great efforts recently in having a new procurement law, new bylaws. They're putting together a system for all public procurements. So it's there. I mean, how can we ensure that more SMEs are tapping into that and getting the supplies that they want? How can the financial sector help that? Will you do more factoring? Will you do more support to them because they don't have liquidity? So, and last but not least, it's the technology, which we're doing a lot in, but I think we need more. The market is around the world. According to my analysis, we have at least 40 to 50,000 people doing online freelancing on international portals from Jordan alone today. The quality is very poor. We need to push that up. So that all has to be a coordinated process. So what can we do also? Productivity gains. If you look at what's happening, productivity numbers in Jordan over the last 10, 15 years, it's all down. So we need to step into these existing businesses, help them increase their productivity. From one side, it's technical. From the other, it's bigger because it's related to energy cost, the doing business cost, cost of water. So these have to be all factored in. And at the same time, we need to work on the demand and work around the demand and supply area. So what are we trying to support here? As you know that earlier this year, the government has issued a vocational training law. And based on that, there should be a number of private sector-led sectors council to support both the supply and get the demand people on board so that they can also be part of the process. So we're now piloting some support with the digital economy or the digital skills sectors council, where the plan is to support training between 10 to 30,000 people in different skills, some of which are going to be related to the military draft announcement that took place today, but others going to be very complicated or sophisticated types of training. And on the other side, we'll do the demand side boosting and then do the connection electronically. So what I'm saying here is that since the problem here, and I know it's perennial because we have more than, I think the unemployment among youth, as it was announced, it's 44.5% now. What we need to do is to work on a micro level rather than the macro horizontal one. I've seen that happening. I was privileged to work with the Bahrainis on resolving a lot of issues similar to this, and it worked because it's a small country, things can happen. So my advice is that let's go down to very specific opportunities. Let's support the skills development. Let's build our institutions to play that role between building the skills, doing the connection, boosting demand. We don't have our institutions all equipped to do that. And namely, I'm saying here, the JETCO, Jordan Exports, and all the others that are here. So these need to be supported to play this role. But I see an opportunity to start some growth even from within the ecosystem today until exports market open up again. And by the way, the good news here is that in June, there was a pickup. There was a pick, in the number of exports that took place, and that reflected well in the bigger number of the country. We don't know how long is that trend going to positively continue, but it's a possibility that it will. But we can start with what we have in our hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, may I comment on what Ali,
of course.
Ali's recipe and clarification for the future? I totally agree with the analysis. I think one thing I would like to add to what he just said, that we need really, I'm sure the World Bank is involved, is how to link the development on the micro level with small business to the macro level. Because at the end of the day, Jordan overall macroeconomic situation is linked to the balance of payment in particular. And we need to close the gap in trade deficit. That requires linking development on the micro level to the export sector, i.e. how to link the small industries, small businesses, be it in the services sector or in the manufacturing or in the agriculture, which is becoming an interesting subject now, the agriculture, how to link this to the export market without, and having in mind that Jordan is adopting an export-led growth policy. This is a very important element. The question is, the institutional arrangement is now within the private sector and the government. Is it enough? What sort of institutional development is needed? What sort of guidance is needed? What sort of financial help is needed? And all these things should be looked into within the frame that Ali has just developed. I like what he said.
Can I, Abu Muhammad, I think it would be interesting that the industries we want to support that export, there's a strong focus on these industries employing a lot of Jordanians and bringing in foreign currency.
Absolutely.
Some of the industries today, as you know, the majority of the labor force is not Jordanian, and a lot of the income that comes in doesn't stay in Jordan. So that would be something that I would focus.
The idea, Shaham, is to have a higher revenues, higher income, and the jobs will become attractive jobs for the Jordanian. And of course, with the technology development, these jobs are not anymore an ordinary jobs. They are very advanced jobs and require qualification and training. And this is linked to the training process that Ali has just described. Private sector will be happy to have Jordanian who are qualified. And another issue is the job classification and the job licensing. We need to license jobs. No, this man is mechanic. This man is qualified, fully qualified, and eligible for the market. Otherwise, the private sector will not take them. We have to understand the private sector wants to make profit and want to have a successful firm. Therefore, they have to use the proper labor force and the productive labor force, and this requires proper training.
I think also,
so I think it is a dilemma. It's not easy, but also I know that some industries have made some arrangements with small companies and they are delivering some inputs to the industries that are exported. I don't have the names now in my mind, but I know some stories that are successful in this. We should expand on this.
Thank you. Can I invite Noor to jump in, please? Sorry, we only have 6 minutes left. Please, Noor.
I just want to second what His Excellency just mentioned about registering SMEs, because, and even not even SMEs, the micro enterprises, many of them are working from home, working or doing certain businesses, and they are not registered, fearing a number of things, one of which would we be taxable, would majority of income, our income would go away from us. I really think that it is important that this segment is well taken care of in terms of giving them all the assurances to be registered. This will help them to register with Social Security. That will give them the needed protection. They will be within the statistics of the country. They will be taken into all the strategies and all the plans of the country. And this, I really feel that it is extremely important. We have worked with a number of...
They don't want to pay tax.
That's not all. That's not all. I mean, I think...
yeah, some of them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but
one reason for not registering is that.
But it's also, I think, because of the difficulty and the cost of doing business. Another thing that I've picked up a lot on, and I hear a lot about, especially from, younger, sort of more entrepreneurial, micro type of enterprises. You've got very high costs infrastructurally, high energy costs, but also high custom duties for those who are involved in any kind of manufacturing. There's a lot of bureaucracy, So I think we need to address the issue of the cost of running business, making it easier for people to register their businesses. And by the way, this also relates to the issue that we were talking about earlier, which is gender. Because many of those, you probably know the statistics, I don't, but I know that anecdotally at least, the majority of those types of businesses are run by women. I think as Ali mentioned earlier also, many of the participants in the informal economy are women. I know that we talked about the vulnerable communities and the refugees in particular. More than 70% of the income generated within the Syrian refugee community is generated by women. So I think all of these things are interrelated, and it really behooves the government to be looking at some of these things and to make some structural shifts that would facilitate.
If we are to monetize the work of women in our society, it will be huge.
Right.
It will be huge. And our national income figures will be much bigger, I think.
Right.
And
Can I
maybe
suggest
one
that we have another
last
panel
remark.
just on this subject? I can see the two women are just jumping in on this. No, we need a full panel just on this subject. Please take note, Professor, because we really are losing the opportunity of having women play an equal part of this workforce. So I totally think that would be a great panel. We have 3 minutes left.
I think, Mary, you've just volunteered to help us design one.
I'm happy to. Fadal, Your Excellency. Dr. Ziad, did you want to say something?
مين بدي يحكي أنا؟
تفضل.
Any closing quotes?
You want me to say something?
Any closing comments on the way forward or any reflections on the panel so far?
I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity of allowing this beautiful gathering. And as we can end up in the discussion, Corona has led us that we have to open the subject of women participation and use women to solve the problem of economic and social problem. But having said that, I think the discussion has opened my eyes, personally, to so many ideas that needs to be pursued. We in the central bank will continue our monitoring of the situation. We have interfered significantly in the market. We made the liquidity available for the government, for the people. We enhanced the resilience of the banking sector. This is an important issue for us. We have reduced the burden on small business as much as we can. More than 4,500 firms has benefited from our facilities. Average loan was about 80,000. So most of them, they are small. I don't know the study of the World Bank, Ali. We need to look into it. But we will continue to, we postponed installments. The resilience, we postponed distribution of profits last year because we needed the banking system to become healthy and able to provide services for the people in a very healthy way. We hope the impact of the crisis on the banking system will be managed safely this year and resume growth next year. Thank you very much. We'll cooperate with you guys on the various issues. We will look with Noor on the issue of national funds, national wealth funds. This is an issue that we need to look into. Still, we have a lot to do. The expectations are that the economy will continue to suffer. But at the end of the day, the recovery is coming, and we have to prepare for it. Our institution should be able to provide capital, to provide liquidity, to provide even from the other side of the coin guidance and support. And let's look forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mary, thank you. Thank you all very, very, very much. This has been instructive, it's been educational, it's been insightful, and it's really been appetite whetting. I mean, one wants to delve into each of those subjects in much more detail. Our thanks are also to the audience. We've had some great audience members with some fantastic questions. I know that, Mary, you've done a great job of integrating as many of the themes that came to us from our audience members through the Q&A function. And we apologize to those whose questions we were not able to address because of time limitations. But this is a series, and we hope to be back with you and talk about this very, very important topic of the economy and economic growth in Jordan. Dr. Fariz mentioned we have to have recovery. I don't think that there is an alternative, right? There's no alternative. So we thank you for all that you do, each and every one of you in your own ways. We all care deeply about this country, and we're very blessed with its leadership, and we are very blessed with everything that it offers, and we're all invested in making it better and to have a thriving future for our kids and grandkids. So thanks again, Mary. You're a brilliant moderator. You've done a great job. And Ali, Shaham, Noor, Akhi Ziad, you have really honored us with your presence and with your insights. So thank you.